Hey everyone, this is David Wolinsky back with another interview from the audio archives of Don't Die. This time I'm bringing to you the first half of my conversation with Alison Tatlock, who's a TV writer probably best known for her work on Halt and Catch Fire and currently Better Call Saul. She and I spoke on December 21st, 2017. If you'd like to provide support for this project through my Patreon, you can check the links down below. Otherwise, you can read other transcripts from this project at nodon'tdie.com. Thanks, and now here's Alison Tatlock.
Okay, sounds good.
Sure.
My name is Alison Tatlock. I am primarily from Brookline, Massachusetts, and I am a television writer. I started writing TV in 2009. My first job was on the HBO series In Treatment. Before that, I worked in the nonprofit sector for a decade and was also an actor, a stage actor primarily. I have an MFA in acting, and I worked in theater for a long time. So I've actually had 3 careers.
Okay, and I guess a good place to start is what did you make of my wanting to talk? Because I know we were introduced through a mutual friend, and you had said you knew nothing about games. So I was just curious, like when that request floated across your desk, like what did you make of someone from my position reaching out to talk to you about topics that intersect with games?
Well, I guess I felt intrigued and and eager to connect any dots to Halt and Catch Fire, the show that I worked on, that I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute, but also a little bit, maybe slightly not nervous, but is this guy sure he has the right person? That kind of feeling.
I get that a lot.
I might not. Right, that I might not have the exact background that you were looking for, the exact angle that you were hoping for, not having done at that point a deep enough dive to, into the breadth and depth of your work. I think I was tempted to pass you off onto one of my colleagues who I felt like maybe would be a better match because she's a TV writer and also a gamer. But when I was assured that wasn't a requirement, then I felt like, okay, awesome. Let's talk. Let's talk about technology and Halt and Catch Fire.
We're gonna find out how it's gonna go in real time together right now.
Sounds good.
Yeah, and then I think something else you hadn't mentioned when you introduced yourself, and you mentioned to me when we last spoke, was you we're either doing some work or hoping to do some work in YA. Is that right?
Yes, right. So I don't lead with that just because it's still it's a little under the radar. Like the work that I've been doing on it hasn't been shared at all, but I'm excited about it. So I've been working on and off for several years now on a YA novel with my sister Jessica Tatlock, who works at MIT and is much savvier about technology than I am. I had an idea for a TV pilot that would be like an animated series within live-action series. So it would be about the animators, and then there would also be snippets of the animated series, and sort of with the idea that the characters would be the alter egos of the people who had created the series. And through some conversations with my sister, I ended up shifting gears and pitching something that was about a woman, a mother in her 40s, who had a alter ego animated avatar. And I pitched the idea just once to HBO and didn't sell it, and then ended up staffing and getting busy on other jobs that prohibited me from continuing to pitch the idea. And through a bunch of conversations and getting some good advice, decided to kind of shift gears in a couple different ways and make the character a lot younger and start by writing a book. So my sister and I had been working on a YA novel that has this kind of gaming avatar component. So I actually started working on that before I worked on Halt and Catch Fire. So I was trying to get smarter about video games and technology, and then I got this job where I had to get smarter about video games and technology. So I'm hoping now that I can take whatever smarts that I've gleaned from working on the show and help make the book a little sharper.
Yeah,
in that way.
I mean, and there's a parallel right there with YA, and I sent you at least one of the interviews I've done with another YA author. So if you read that, you saw me asking Gail about just sort of the preconceived notions about YA, and so the sort of tension that it creates in impacting the types of stories that you can tell, like the sort of criteria that you have to like please a younger audience, but also still try to please an older one as well. I mean, it sounds like you've been serially interrupted in trying to work on this, but have you run into this yet with your YA? Is this something you've thought about, sort of about?
Well, yeah. The problem, yes, I haven't run into it in a global sense yet, just because again, it's been. You're one of the few people who knows about it.
I'm quickly
right
gathering,
now, to be honest.
And that's why I didn't find much in my research.
I mean, my mom read it, but this is just like something we've been working on. It has not been shared. My agents haven't read it. Like it's, but I'm kind of excited to talk about it. Part of the reason I think I'm starting to talk about it more is because I have a 12-year-old daughter, and she is obsessed with YA literature. And books right now are blowing her mind, and she will sit and read for 5 hours. So I started writing this book when she was younger and was still reading books for younger kids, and now I've kind of watched her during this process grow into a more sophisticated reader and someone who's really obsessed with these stories in a profound way. Mm-hmm. So my hope is that I'm going to start reading the books that she's reading, so that she and I can talk about it, and so that I can also, I don't know, dig in a little bit to the types of stories and the tone. And there's a range, so she's definitely a genre girl, and she loves fantasy, and she loves heightened worlds. When she was younger, she loved Percy Jackson, and she, continues to dig that kind of thing. But it doesn't have to be that, and she's read a bunch of books now. I'm looking at one right now called We Were Liars, that she's obsessed with. That's, more kind of grounded in reality kinds of books. So the book that I was working on is a combo, in a way, of those two genres, and it's also a little bit funny. So she was just reading this book, Fangirl, and I feel like maybe the book that we've been working on kind of lives a little bit in that world. However, when we first wrote our book, we wrote it for a little bit younger audience. So that's the thing that's been tricky. I haven't thought so much about how to please the adults and teenagers. I've been more flummoxed by, is my book for 11-year-olds or 15?
Yeah.
Is there a more sophisticated version of it? Because I know that the books that my daughter is reading now are pretty edgy, and that, of course, was not the case a few years ago. So that's what we're trying to do, or that's what we'll do when we go back to it, I think, is really take a look at what audience,
gotcha,
age-wise, we're aiming for.
Well, so it sounds like you approach at least some of, if not a lot of your work to sort of learn about things that you don't know about. And I know that you said with Halt and Catch Fire that you actually learned a lot about gaming working on the show. And I don't know if that was something you set out to do. Obviously, by virtue of the show, it was part of the show. What sort of things did you learn? I mean, did you have like preconceived notions of your own that you found were challenged and you had to dispose of, or was it just you had a blank slate and you learned some stuff?
I think both in different areas of the show. I think I did have some preconceived notions, and I think I maybe started out a little too dismissive and I don't know, like, this is a thing that I don't really relate to and I don't really get, and kids are obsessed with it and kids are addicted to it, and I don't want my kid to be addicted to it, and this is my kind of global stance on this thing. And then I ended up co-writing an episode with my colleague Lisa Albert, and we happened to be two of the older people on the staff and probably the two least technologically minded people on the staff, and we wrote an episode together where we had to create a video game and describe it, and also write what we refer to as a hacker's manifesto. So we had a lot of laughter between ourselves. It was like, I can't believe of all the people sitting at this table that the two of us are going to create a video game and write a hacker's manifesto.
Yeah.
This is funny.
Yeah.
And she took the video game part of it, and I took the hacker's manifesto. So I have to give her credit for this incredible video game that she created, I'm sure with the help of research and consultants, but she really created the heart of it, and it was beautiful. And not just beautiful in the way that it was visually realized by the talented people who were creating the imagery for the show, but the whole gestalt of the game was deep and meaningful and emotional, and then that kind of happened. This was in season 3, and there was another
Pilgrim.
round of this in season 4 with Pilgrim, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
The guys created another game called Pilgrim, which in a way, even though the characters on the show are flummoxed by the game, and the game is a failure, actually, spoiler alert.
I'm sitting down.
Well, you know, we really want people to watch Halt and Catch Fire, so we don't want to ruin it for anybody.
No, that's true. That's fair.
Right? Yeah. But Pilgrim, nonetheless, again, beautiful in its imagery, and maybe hard and even frustrating or aggravating to play. I never had to play it, but the characters did, and they had a hard time with it. But the whole idea of a game that you don't win, a game that's not actually a competition, that was kind of revelatory to me. And I really enjoyed and appreciated the layers of both of those games. And then just the flip side of that is, as our characters were obsessed with these kinds of games that were about emotional journey, and they themselves, the characters, were kind of poo-pooing the more popular and, in some cases, violent games, we also tried to acknowledge on the show that those games are really fun, and in a lot of cases, and that the characters love playing them. So even though I myself have not played them, I understood. I did understand and do understand what's fun and compelling about them, and just the idea of getting to blow off steam.
I mean, a big thing, I don't know if this is splashed onto your radar, but a big thing that's come, especially in recent years, to sort of define the narrative around gaming, and certainly maybe all of tech, is just sort of the marginalization of women. And I don't know if, like, for example, like the character Cameron is much more of an exception to the rule, much more of a minority than the reality, than, you know, the norm. I mean, were there discussions about sort of demonstrating this type of marginalization on the show, and sort of, you know, how do you balance that against, you know, being accused of sort of telling revisionist history? Is that something that you guys had discussed?
We did. We talked about revisionist history in the room a lot, not just in this particular. Well, I think you're right. I think it was largely about gender and sometimes about race as well. We knew that we were telling a kind of unique story of these two women, Cameron and Donna, who went into tech together. And we also had a third female character that Annabeth Gish played, the character of Diane, who was a VC, you know, heavy hitter. Yeah. And we would often joke, like, she's the only one. Like, but it's okay. Like, there was one. Yeah. So we tried to stay within the reality of what the landscape actually looked like, with maybe a little bit of wiggle room, so that we could have a bullpen of coders that was more diverse than perhaps it would have been if we had been 100% historically accurate. So we kind of bumped up against the reality a little bit and poked and pushed, but we tried not to go off the rails. And we had stories where the female characters confronted the sexism they experienced the sexism that was going on at the time. So we were not in any way trying to pretend that was not going on, or that it was easy to be a woman who was succeeding in this way, or that, in fact, the name Cameron, which could be the name of a man or a woman, we talked a lot about that's interesting that that's her name, and that people would probably assume as a famous, successful video game designer, which she is at least briefly, assume that she was a man. I can't remember I don't know that we ever really shone a light on that.
I was trying
but we certainly talked about it. Yeah, I know. I'm trying to remember.
I'm trying to remember. Like maybe it popped up in the review of the game in the EGM magazine or whatever. But I think they had a picture of her in there.
Yeah.
But no, I mean that's related to another thing I wanted to ask about, which is, I mean, obviously, the show jumps around a little bit in time, which gives you a fair amount of ability and liberty of, stories you can tell and things you can touch on. I mean, were there things that you guys wanted to get into the show but couldn't? I mean, whether it's to, paint a more complete picture or just stuff that you found, interesting in your research and maybe lesser known. Like, what sort of things did you want to get in but just there wasn't space for?
Oh gosh, that's an interesting question. I mean, I'm sure there were, but I don't know off the top of my head. I feel. Do you mean like if there was a tech breakthrough?
Yeah.
That made it onto the show, and in fact, we had to sometimes skip forward in time on the show in order to be true to the timeline of the actual sort of tech events and innovations that were taking place. In other words, we tried to use technology on the show as metaphor for what the characters were going through emotionally. And so we didn't want the show to be driven by the tech, and yet the tech certainly kind of set the scene and sort of metaphorically kind of drove each season. Mm-hmm. That said, when there was no tech going on, and there were certainly gaps in the 80s and 90s where there was not a lot going on, for instance, a couple years before the internet, we didn't want to lie about the timeline. We tried to be really true to that stuff. So we would be in an interesting position story-wise sometimes, because without the tech at all, I mean, the characters could certainly still live their lives, but the driving force of their creative passion wouldn't have been there.
Right.
So we jumped around a little bit according to what was going on in the tech. So that in that way, the tech drove what we were doing, and the big tech, breakthroughs or innovations during that time period always made it onto the show. So I don't think there was anything we were like, oh, shoot, like if only we could. I mean, certainly we did not get as far as social media. The show did not get that, and did not get there, and that would be interesting. We had early chat rooms. One of our seasons. But I'm trying to think if there was anything like, I can tell you we talked a lot about characters having babies or not having babies. But in the end, I feel like that's something that we were all, as a group, happy that we did not put into the show. It wasn't something that we felt sad about leaving behind. We didn't want the answer to narratives about women characters to be driven by childbirth.
Yeah. Well, I told you when we previously spoke, I mean, just in general, what intrigued me about speaking to you is just, what it was like working on a show like that at a time where we are starting to see, much more widespread criticism of tech. And I don't know, because the show also takes place in the past. I mean, what's sort of the calculus happening inside of a writer's room when you're deciding, how to comment or shine a different light or foreshadow about things that are happening right now?
Yeah. We talked about that a lot. We were together in the room when Trump was elected. We were together in the room when the whole notion of fake news was kind of landed as a phenomenon. So it was, and the guys who were running the show, who created the show, Chris Rogers and Chris Cantwell, were very generous. Well, generous in many ways, but generous with us as a room to create the space for us to kind of unpack emotionally sometimes what we were each going through individually and as a group because of the political movement in our country. So they created the space for that, partly just because they wanted to have a safe space where people could bring in their shit and talk about it, but also because it did relate to the show itself. So as we were, busting our asses as writers to try to figure out the tech stories, the notion of algorithms as something that could do and had done a ton of damage in terms of isolating people, and the whole idea of like people being isolated in their own little bubble, and what was going on with Facebook, all of that was actually happening.
Yeah.
So it was pretty profound, actually, and I think it did. It colored what we were doing, but only insofar as it deepened it, because I think we were already, the premise of the show is about how technology connects and separates people.
Yeah.
So, and each season we tried to find a different angle, and I was only worked on season 3 and season 4, but starting with season 1, the sort of tech thrust of each season would be, this is what's going on in tech, and this is how it's going to bring these people who love each other closer together and split them apart. So when we were talking about the algorithms and the divisiveness in our country, it seemed like a sad but also logical conclusion of the kind of stuff that we had already been digging into.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of, all the social media, I myself have a kind of, fraught relationship with a little, because as much as the next person, I like seeing pictures of my friends' babies, and I have friends who are all over the world, and I like feeling connected to them, and I like seeing pictures of their faces and knowing that they're safe, and I have a niece and nephew who are teenagers, and I very much appreciate being able to kind of quickly check in and have that sense of family connectivity. And I also deeply resent all the pitfalls that come with that. So it's that dichotomy that the show really was about.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it spoke to me because here we are speaking about it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you about the manifesto or the suicide note, which, by the way, was like the single most thing that was the point in the series where I had the most people in my orbit telling me I should start watching the show.
Oh, wow.
So, I don't know. I mean, I'm wondering sort of about this I felt like making Ryan's message sort of one from the future, sort of making him like a prophet that nobody believes. I mean, do you have evidence of people sharing that sentiment way back when, that, tech is a force for isolating us and hurting each other?
You mean like, was the suicide note / Hacker's Manifesto based on stuff that had actually been written or published that we were aware of?
I mean, because in my research on this, I mean, I came across, let me see, this woman who posted online named Humdog, who was a lot less hopeful than Ryan, much more apocalyptic. So, I mean,
when was that?
That was around that era. I mean, early 90s. So, I mean, I'm not asking you to cite your sources. I guess I'm just curious.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
I wrote that manifesto with a suicide note with of course feedback and support from all the other writers, and I feel like in that case I sort of wrote it from the heart, and wrote it very much not based on other stuff that I had read. We did talk about the guy at MIT, and I'm forgetting his name. I think his first name was Andrew, maybe Andrew Schwartz. Don't quote me because I don't think that's right.
Okay.
But I can double check.
Sure.
Who committed suicide. So Ryan's character was a little bit inspired by a couple different people that we had read about, including that man. He didn't leave behind a note. So I love it. I like it that you call Ryan a prophet, and we knew in a way, as writers, we were taking a little bit of a risk putting this, sort of articulating this conflict, putting that into the mouth of a character that the audience and even we who created him didn't know up until that point that was brewing inside of him, but it felt organic to us. It felt true, and it felt like he could be the carrier of that message in a way that we believed.
Well, I had read too that sort of an impetus for his creation was sort of having someone, which is another sort of archetype of the tech world, a person who just has trouble communicating their ideas to other people.
Yes.
Which gets into an interesting thing with tech in general and social media, all these things you said. And I don't know that this question even has an answer, but because this certainly wasn't the case before, when the show picks up, where people thought the ability to express themselves through a computer is the purest form of expression. And then you go on social media today, and this seems to be something that many believe. Why do you think that is a thing that has changed in our culture, that we think, sitting by ourselves with our devices with no one else around, casting a few sentences aside is like the best and healthiest expression of, who we are?
Why has that changed from
actually talking to each other?
Yeah. Well, talking to each other, and also I was going to say, like, we used to write letters. And,
yeah.
Yeah. Gosh.
I mean, and you can disagree with the premise. I mean, I feel like it's a pessimistic question, but I feel like I
don't disagree. I don't know that it might not be a universal opinion.
Yeah.
But I guess there's something about shooting off a text or shooting off a tweet that feels immediate, that not only feels, but that is immediate and organic and unfiltered. And so maybe we feel that there's something about, like, the vomiting of it that makes it true. Because vomiting is very true, right? Like,
it's hard to argue with vomit. That's true.
It's hard to argue with vomit. You're not censoring yourself.
Yeah.
It's just your animal self.
Yeah. Right?
And maybe we romanticize. I don't think we romanticize vomiting. Really, nobody likes vomiting. I think that's fair to say. But metaphorically speaking, perhaps we romanticize this idea of, like, the impulse. Like, that was just me. It's just me, unfiltered. This is what I think, blah.
Yeah.
And that if we stop and think and edit and rewrite or listen, because you said about having a conversation, go back and forth, listen to each other, perhaps there's a notion that that's artifice.
Conversing?
And the opposite might be true. It might be true, in fact, that our more truer selves are expressed when we're more thoughtful and mindful and when we slow it down. But I think both can be true. I think
they're both true at the same time for different people, because we're not.
I do too. Yeah. I mean, we know that in anger we blurt hurtful stuff, which might not be what we actually wanted to say or intended to say, or might not be how we feel 10 minutes later, and then we regret it. And yet, was there truth to what we said? Of course.
Yeah. So you may scoff at this question, but what do you think Joe McMillan would make of the internet today?
I'm not really a scoffer, so
well,
no worries
okay.
there. No, I think that's a good question.
I mean, especially, in light with this net neutrality stuff being repealed. I mean, the internet that we are inheriting is, not the one. I mean, not the one we had 20 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago.
Right. I think Joe and the other characters on the show would be both horrified and amazed. Because how can you not be both of those things?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we started dipping our toes into the meanness and cruelty of the internet and the homophobia and the bullying. And we didn't tell stories of racism, but misogyny and racism. I can't imagine that our characters, just like us, wouldn't feel completely, demoralized and freaked out by all of that. Mm-hmm. And also the scope and potential and of the connectivity of it in its nonviolent manifestation is pretty incredible. So I think he would feel both.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I don't know. I mean, what I was struck by, obviously, I don't know when this is going to be published, but when we're speaking, this is all, the ink is still drying on at least the net neutrality aspect. And what I was struck by was sort of this, we mentioned revisionist history before, but sort of this accelerated revisionist history, where I saw a lot of people behaving as though the internet has been a utopia for, last few years. I think, I don't know. I mean, in general, I'm concerned about, we seem to have lost our sense of long-term memory about things, and when it comes to things like the internet, I don't know. Lately, I've reached this conclusion that I just feel like the tech on the internet is dumb. It's not necessarily the stuff that people are putting on there. It's not even necessarily the people's fault themselves. It's just sort of, there's too much of everything all the time, and there's not enough distance. And I don't know. In a way, it reminds me of like echoes of when we built the first cities. Only the difference is the toxicity of the 14th century was like the Black Death, and the toxicity today is taking a completely different form. And people talk about these things as though they're fixable, but I don't know if they are. And I don't know. I don't know. I'm just reacting here, but do you think these are fixable things? I don't know that we can rid the regular world of assholes. Of course we're going to have assholes online as well.
I don't think they are. I think you're right that they probably are not fixable.
I don't know if that means it's hopeless.
But they are possibly balanced by another, I don't know, sort of like yin-yang, I guess, the force of using the same technologies for progressive ideals. I don't know. That might be kind of idealistic on my part. And I didn't really address the part of your question when you asked what Joe would think of net neutrality stuff that's going on right now.
Oh, that's okay.
I would imagine
just kind of a buzzy
he would be
thing,
horrified by that, as I am. I actually have a pretty awesome, very awesome 18-year-old nephew who wrote a kind of amazing manifesto about net neutrality. Maybe I'll send that to you.
Yeah, I'd love to see that.
Yeah. So he's more articulate about it probably than I am right now. And he's somebody who has felt isolated, as a lot of teenagers seem to feel recently. Which there's a lot of theorizing that the reason teenagers feel isolated is because of technology, but just like, it's the same theme over and over again, the flip side of that is that he feels that the cure for his isolation has also been access to the internet. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of both. There was an article in the New York Times Magazine a few weeks ago, I don't know if you saw it, about teenagers and anxiety and how they're just epidemic levels right now of anxiety, crippling anxiety amongst teenagers, and that experts and psychologists are claiming or feeling that a lot of that has to do with technology. But it also is undeniable that a kid who's stuck at home during the day for whatever reason is able to connect with other people. But then it also gives that kid a reason not to leave the house. So it's just both. The duality is
the both at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.